Society has always had a fascination with death and what lies beyond, and so it's no surprise that ghost trains and haunted houses are universally a popular attraction at any amusement park. But one of the most iconic haunted houses in the world, the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, may come with a host of paranormal characters that aren't anything to do with animatronics or strategically placed panes of glass, because both cast members and guests alike have claimed to have ghostly experiences with multiple different entities within the attraction. Welcome, foolish mortals. That's right, we are back again with more stories from the seemingly utterly haunted Disneyland. There's obviously the one main character from Disneyland's paranormal lineup who's seen almost everywhere in the park, the person that we spoke about last week, Walt Disney himself. But there are so many more ghost stories around particular areas of the park, even particular attractions. But today we're focusing in on just one, the Haunted Mansion. I couldn't cover ghost stories about Disneyland and not cover the one that actually advertises its ghosts, right? But the idea behind the Haunted Mansion began in 1951, when Walt Disney and his team were still putting together their ideas for what they wanted to include within Disneyland. Because Walt knew that you gotta have a haunted house, you can't not. But it wasn't until around 1957 when they started thinking about expanding Frontierland to include a new area, New Orleans Square. And within this area would be the Haunted Mansion. It took 5 more years to go through the design and ideation stage though, but they finally started building the exterior facade in 1962, which was completed the year after. And there was still a little back and forth about what was going to be inside the attraction. They still hadn't fully decided whether it was just going to be kind of like a walkthrough thing or an actual ride, like all of these decisions and logistics. So there were a lot of delays. They were also doing work on the New York World's Fair, which took priority over the Haunted Mansion. And so because of these delays, there were a lot of rumours about what was actually going on with this attraction. Guests had apparently been given pamphlets about this particular attraction opening in 1963, and still there was nothing. Like, hello, what's going on with this big mansion building that you've built and not opened yet? Unfortunately though, Walt Disney passed away in 1966 without ever fully realising the idea that he'd had all the way back in 1951. But with the outer building already built, so guests were expecting something. And with the knowledge that Walt had always envisioned a haunted house attraction at Disneyland, they carried on reworking and fleshing out the attraction, settling on it becoming an actual ride using what they called doom buggies as the ride system, and eventually opening to the public on the 12th of August 1969. And luckily, it seems to have been worth the wait. It continues to be such a popular ride, but it isn't always the animatronic ghosts that creep out the guests, because the Haunted Mansion is, allegedly, actually haunted. Workers who were fitting out the inside of the ride would apparently often hear weird, disembodied voices coming from somewhere, although they could never find the source of these voices. It always kind of just sounded like it was in the room next to them, or like the next area. There was one particularly famous story of a sound designer who was working in the seance room, and he was just there doing whatever it was that he was doing when he started hearing the faint noise of conversations coming from the walls. Being relatively level-headed about the fact that he was literally working in an attraction centered around ghosts, his first thought was that someone must have walled up a transistor radio by accident, which makes sense. There probably would have been more than a few radios dotted about the place, playing music or whatever while the builders were working. So maybe, I don't know, someone just missed it and sealed it up into the wall without realising that it was there. At this point, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't going to hurt the overall attraction if there was a radio. It was going to run out of battery, being left continuously playing. It's all good. But even so, he kept on coming back to the seance room every day just to check, but he could still hear this hushed conversation. Couldn't make out what these disembodied voices were talking about, but they were clear enough that there was definitely something going on. And the theory of it being a transistor radio, well, that's becoming more and more unlikely. Obviously, the battery would not have lasted that long, but also there was never any music playing, never any ad breaks. He was obviously checking out the area around the seance room too, seeing if there was a particularly chatty work crew working just outside, but nope, there wasn't a soul around. These voices were coming from the walls. So there's only one thing for it to try and get to the bottom of this particular conundrum. A few days after he first started hearing the voices, he started poking holes in the wall, trying to find the radio or anything that might be emitting these sounds. But he found absolutely nothing, and still the voices continued. In the very definition of "I'm not paid enough for this," the guy fixed all the holes in the wall that he'd made and allegedly installed a speaker in that area of the seance room to drown out the noise of these voices. I just find that quite ironic that you would drown out the disembodied voices that don't have an explanation and install a speaker so that you can control the ghostly noises that guests hear. I don't know, I just thought that was quite funny. But that wasn't the only experience that apparently happened while the Haunted Mansion was being built. There was a story about a group of builders who were just working away when all of a sudden they noticed a man that they didn't recognise standing somewhere that he shouldn't have been. Assuming he must have been a guest or a cast member who had no business being in the construction site, one of the builders told him that you can't be here, you need to leave. The intruder responded saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," before turning and walking away. The way he walked was directly over a huge, great big gaping hole in the floor. The builder watched, not really registering what he was seeing, as this figure of a man was floating basically mid-air. There was no floor underneath him, before the figure just vanished. Okay, well now that just makes you feel bad. The ghost man just wanted to see what you were up to. He was clearly in no danger, as proven by walking over a hole in the floor and not falling through it, but I feel like that just makes the story so interesting, don't you? It wasn't this uber scary apparition with the glowing white light and the creepy ambience that makes you do your best Shaggy from Scooby-Doo impression of seeing a ghost. He just saw a normal guy who shouldn't have been back there. I don't know, I just find that a really interesting detail. But once the ride opened up, the ghost stories from both guests and cast members started coming thick and fast, and still continue to this day. And we're not just talking, oh, I got a bit creeped out on the ghost ride. Some of these are definitely a bit weird. Guests have reported being touched on the shoulders just as they pass into the entrance of the attraction. Thinking it's another member of their group trying to get their attention, they turn around, but there's absolutely no one there. But it seems like a lot of these stories centre around the seance room, which seems to be quite an active hotspot within the Haunted Mansion. I mean, this was the area where that sound designer was hearing those disembodied voices, so it's kind of got a little bit of a reputation already. But a big thing that a lot of the guests seem to report is that if they know that they're alone in the attraction, at least the doom buggies in front of them and behind them are empty, because when you get in them at the loading area, you'll know if there's any people in front of you or behind you. When they get to the seance room, they can see people sitting in these doom buggies that shouldn't be there. And a lot of the time, these mysterious riders appear to be a woman and her young son, who may be making an appearance later on in this story. But the guests that see these people in the doom buggies ahead or behind them, it would be easy to pass it off as, oh, well, maybe I didn't see them in the loading area. It happens. But then when it comes to unloading, they've disappeared again. And that's happened to cast members too. They'll be monitoring guests coming through to unloading and start calling out for the guests to exit their doom buggies. But when they look, there's no one in the doom buggies, no one at all anywhere around the unloading area. Weird. As you move through the seance room and into the grand ballroom though, there are some guests who claim to be grabbed by something unseen as they're passing through. But the thing about this area is that while it's reasonably well lit, there aren't many places for cast members or even guests to hide. And so it'd be next to impossible to jump out and grab guests riding by on the doom buggies, as to look at them, they're super tall, they've got sides that come all the way around. At the very least, you'd be seen if you did reach out and grab someone. And that's why a skeptical guest was left questioning what actually happened in the 80s when she was riding through, because she most definitely felt someone who she couldn't see grab her quite firmly on both of her shoulders in the ballroom. So I mean, you're going through the Haunted Mansion because you enjoy it. Maybe you like getting creeped out a little bit within a safe, controlled environment, but I guess there might be the chance to experience more than you signed up for when you hopped into your doom buggy, or maybe even afterwards too. Right at the end of the Haunted Mansion, there is a small figure of a phantom bride known as Little Leota, who calls out to you as you're exiting to hurry back and be sure to bring your death certificate. I wouldn't even want to hazard a guess at how many times cast members working in the unloading area hear that every day. So it will definitely stick in your mind if the words were, for whatever reason, different to the hundreds of other times you've heard it. But that's apparently what some cast members have claimed happened. Some report that they have heard her say things other than her lines, which logically is impossible as it's a pre-recorded tape that plays. But even weirder, sometimes they'll hear this figure call out to guests by their names as they're going past, which would be absolutely terrifying if that's actually true. I would certainly have issues working there alone after that, because by far it's the cast members who experience most of the weirdness, usually near to or after closing time. And one of their jobs at the end of the day is to walk through the whole ride track just to make sure everything's where it should be, there are no problems, no one's hiding, none of the guests have dropped anything and what have you. And yet again, it's the seance room that they seem to dread walking through the most. On multiple occasions, cast members will be walking through the seance room, they're looking around, checking things, and all of a sudden, all the lights will turn off. The stage lights that are lighting up all the scenery, and the floodlights, which obviously have to be turned on for health and safety, so cast members can actually see what needs to be seen, and they can actually watch where they're walking to. All of them switch off. So they'll just be there, standing in complete pitch black darkness. There's no light in the room at all. And they'll radio up to a cast member who's sitting at the control tower like, why have all the lights gone off? But the cast member sitting at the controls will be like, beats me, switch is turned on, the lights should be on. So the poor cast members stuck in the dark will then have to kind of like feel their way out of the seance room and back into the floodlights in the next scene. Could be the cast member playing a prank, knowing the reputation of the seance room, maybe. But obviously it's a huge no-no to put your colleagues in danger. I can imagine you'd get in a lot of trouble for that, so maybe not. But it's also not unusual for cast members doing this final walk around to feel exactly what the guests from the 80s described, only they're not in a doom buggy and the ride isn't operational. They'll just be walking around the track and they'll feel unseen hands on them, which is just creepy. In one instance as well, there were cast members doing this walk around when they started hearing a weird drumming sound. Okay, maybe there's something else going on in the park, some sort of practice after closing, I don't know. So they carried on walking, but as they started approaching the seance room, the drumming sound was getting louder and louder. And it kept getting louder as they walked inside the seance room. I don't think they ever got to the bottom of what that drumming sound was. No one else ever reported it either, as far as I can tell, but it was definitely coming from inside that room. Some strange sound effect going off maybe? I don't know. There are other times where technology does other weird, unexplainable things. So basically underneath the doom buggies, there are apparently like sensor beams, which will trigger the ride to do an emergency stop if it senses anything. So like guests' feet getting too close to the track or anything like that, just so they don't end up getting run over. Well, apparently, while cast members were doing these closing checks, which I assume includes one ride around, the doom buggies will do one of these emergency stops because these sensors get tripped. Even when there's no one on the track, no one even in the doom buggy where the sensor tripped, nothing. And so while a lot of the activity is just harmless, if a little inconvenient, some cast members claim that there is something else going on in the Haunted Mansion that sits more on the not very nice side of things. Because one cast member, as she was in the loading area near to closing time, she had a particularly horrifying encounter, to be honest. She was all alone, there was no guests or colleagues anywhere near her, when all of a sudden she heard a voice right up in her ear tell her to get out. As she heard this voice, she apparently also felt something unseen pull her hair. Working in a place you feel like might be haunted, that's one thing. But working in some place where you suspect it's haunted and it might be haunted by something not only can you not see, but also clearly does not want you there, that is just another level. Like, no thank you. I would not like to experience that type of magic at Disneyland, thank you very much. And it's not just hearing things, feeling the sensation of being touched or your hair pulled by something you can't see. These cast members during closing, sometimes they actually do see things that they can't explain too. There was one guy who worked at Disneyland in the early 2000s and he was just emptying the bins in that unloading exit area after the park had closed for the night. And he'd gone down the back way because there were some employee-only stairs there. And in this hallway, there was an elderly woman in a wheelchair. But it was one of those early 20th century wooden wheelchairs, very out of place. But this cast member was busy, or it just didn't register in his brain while he had jobs to do, so he just carried on. It wasn't until he was stood there tying up the bin bag just off from this hallway that his brain kind of caught up a bit and went, hang on a minute, wooden wheelchair aside, why is there someone who is quite clearly a guest back here in the employee hallway way past park closing time? So he just poked his head back out to where this elderly woman had been sitting to see that she had completely vanished. And in reality, this had probably been a few seconds in between seeing her and poking his head back out looking for her, like a minute at most. There's no way she would have been able to move that quickly, or at least not make any noise as she moved away. So that was weird, but it was made all the weirder when he got chatting to another cast member a few months afterwards, and they'd started swapping ghost stories. And the cast member that he was talking to, she said that she'd had a weird encounter when she was cleaning up in the Haunted Mansion one time. What did she say? She said that she'd seen an elderly woman sitting in an old vintage-looking wheelchair. When this cast member had done a double take to question why she was there, the elderly woman had completely disappeared, just gone without a trace. So that is awfully strange for two cast members to experience the same thing. Makes you wonder if there are any more sightings of this particular figure. But if you don't come across her apparition, there are others that you may see, including a woman wearing Victorian clothing. She's been seen walking through the cemetery before walking through the walls into the mansion. There have also been reports of a man in a tuxedo and top hat, and also a man with a cane. One of these men, I don't know which one it is, has apparently been seen by cast members walking right through the hearse that sits outside the mansion in the queue area. Is he a residual echo from before Disneyland was there? Like maybe the Victorian woman is? And they're just going about their residual hauntings with no idea of the entire theme park around them? Or is he even somewhat connected to the hearse itself? Because that white hearse, that is actually from the late 1800s. There was was an urban legend that this was the hearse that carried the body of Brigham Young, who was one of the founders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as Mormons. Although that's not thought to be the case, it was just an urban legend that the hearse picked up along the way. However, being a hearse that dates back to the late 19th century, it's likely that many people were taken to their resting place in the back of this carriage. So could someone have hitched a ride and wound up at Disneyland instead? I don't know. Seems unlikely, but you never know. There is one more apparition that you may see in the Haunted Mansion though, and this one has been seen so often that he's been given the name Timmy. And there are a few different versions of Timmy's story of how he came to be in the mansion, but the main one goes that he was a boy who got sick and unfortunately passed away quite young. And he was a huge fan of the Haunted Mansion, and his dying wish was to become one of the Haunted Mansion ghosts, which, I don't know, that is just such a really sad story. And so after he passed away, his mom took his cremated ashes and scattered them throughout the Haunted Mansion ride, because that is a thing that people do with alarming regularity. So much so that it's got its own code now, so if you hear cast members talking about a HEPA cleanup, someone's just been caught spreading ashes. There was a Disneyland custodian who said that the Haunted Mansion probably has so much haunted ashes in it that it's not even funny. So if you're thinking about dumping grandma in the happiest place on earth, just don't. But anyway, the story goes that his mom got away with spreading the ashes, although now cast members and guests have seen the figure of a little boy crying near the exit. Cast members who see him will go over, check he's doing okay. Obviously he doesn't look like it, but he'll look up at them and ask for his mom before just vanishing into thin air right in front of their eyes. But other times, guests will see the face of a young boy peering out at them from the doom buggy in front. And when they get to the loading area, there was no one in that doom buggy. Or perhaps even creepier, there was one cast member who was working in unloading in the 90s, and she was checking the mirror in front of her because using that mirror you can make sure that all the guests are getting out and going up the exit ramp as they should be. So there was this one group of guests who were getting out and started exiting, but as she was watching in the mirror, she saw a little boy just standing there. Okay, she thought he must be waiting for his parents or someone in the next group. The next group came along, disembarked and exited, but she saw the little boy in the mirror still standing there. As soon as she saw him still waiting there, she turned around, maybe he needs help or something, but as she looked to where the boy should have been standing, there was nothing there. And so it seems like he's quite active around this unloading area. Cast members, when it gets quiet, will sometimes hear the sound of children laughing, but when the next group of guests come through, there weren't any kids with them, so no explanation for the laughter. Another cast member was utterly creeped out when she was, again, working in unloading and felt the sensation of a child tugging at her skirt. She looked down, there was nothing there, but it was at that moment that she noticed that her uniform was covered in small dusty handprints at the height of about where a child would reach. And as she was noticing these handprints that she had absolutely no idea where they had come from, she heard the disembodied laughter of a small child. I mean, that's just a lot, isn't it? It is worth saying here though that this Timmy either travels between attractions or folks have got their stories mixed up, because apparently from everything that I found online and in the books, there is another ghostly Timmy haunting the Alice in Wonderland ride, where it said that he peeks out from behind the tulips and if you call out his name, he will make the ride break down. But then also, there was a story about a mom spreading her son's ashes in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and that now a little Timmy haunts that ride too. But the majority of the sources I used places the one and only Timmy the Ghost in the Haunted Mansion. And so with all of that going on, with an overwhelming amount of unexplained activity happening within the Haunted Mansion, which has absolutely nothing to do with the ghosts in the scenery of the ride itself, it kind of does leave you asking the question, why? Or at least it does to me anyway. And there might be a few reasons for this. Well, there are a lot of stories more than anything. I don't think I'd go so far as to call them explanations, but see what you think of these. There are a couple of rumours surrounding the seance room specifically, saying that the spell book is a real spell book, and the spell that Madame Leota is reciting is actually a real spell from that book. Because there was also talk that this spell book would mysteriously move about the room during the night. So cast members would close up the attraction and it's in its proper place, but by the time morning shift started, the book would be moved, no explanation. And it's also said that the Ouija board on the table in the seance room has been used in real seances that allegedly weren't closed down properly afterwards. And aside from the seance room, there are other stories floating around about the Haunted Mansion, with one urban legend saying that there was once a drunk teenager who stepped out of the doom buggy for some reason. He didn't see a gap in the floor because it was still pretty dark, and he fell and fatally broke his neck. However, there's no evidence of this actually happening. There's no name, no news records tied to this, nothing. Other people believe that it's nothing to do with Disneyland because the land itself where the Haunted Mansion sits was haunted before Walt Disney ever came along. A medium who once walked through the attraction allegedly picked up on a young boy different to Timmy. This boy was called Brandon, who lived there back when the land was still just orange groves. His stepdad had taken him on a hike through these orange groves, but had allegedly killed Brandon before taking his own life. And now the little boy haunts the cemetery area, which is about the spot where he died. Obviously, all of that information is from from a psychic medium, it's what she picked up in the area, there is no proof, no records, yada yada. But I mean, it would go some way to explaining why even the construction workers were seeing things before the Haunted Mansion was even the Haunted Mansion. Even if it's not specifically Brandon, but other unfortunate deaths. Like the builders seeing that guy float above a hole in the floor, you know? A lot of people who believe in the hauntings speculate that it is a combination of people continuing to spread loved ones' ashes here, as well as just the general energy of the park itself. Theme parks are such high energy places, lots of people passing through, adrenaline, excitement, and that somehow maybe that fuels the potentially paranormal goings on. But no matter what you think of the real ghosts said to reside within the Haunted Mansion, the fact remains that Disneyland is proud of the 999 happy haunts in residence, and that there's always room for one more if there are any volunteers. Any volunteers? Disney, you're just asking for people to dump relatives' ashes in your ride at this point. I'm assuming that's how they think they're volunteering. Sorry. Anyway, what do you think? Do we have real ghosts alongside the animatronic characters in the Haunted Mansion? Or is it all just stories worthy of swapping by a campfire shared between cast members during a bit of downtime? For me, I think the Haunted Mansion is haunted, but I think it's less to do with the building itself and more to do with Disneyland as a whole. From doing my research and seeing the sheer scale of stories, to me, there's gotta be something going on here. Whether it's like I mentioned earlier, the amount of energy that guests bring to a park every day that's fueling something, whether it's something that happened in the area before Disneyland was built, I don't know. But I think the encounters that cast members have in the Haunted Mansion after closing, there are just too many. And yeah, it could just be that it's a creepy place to work in, and so you're almost expecting to come face to face with a ghost. But I don't know, I feel like it might have something to do with it, but I'm also inclined to believe the cast members, even if just a fraction of them are actually truly unexplainable. And yeah, it could be from people spreading ashes, it could be from people coming back to their favourite place in the world if they had happy memories here in life. The truth is, we just don't really know how the paranormal works, so anything is a speculation, but that's just the fun of it. But anyway, that is enough going around in circles. Leave your thoughts down below, and especially if you've had an experience in the Haunted Mansion or anywhere else in the park, I want to know about it, so please do comment. And if you enjoyed this video, please do give it one of those little likes, and subscribe if you haven't already, because we are not done talking about Disneyland just yet. I have one more part to this little series with some super creepy stories that I could not ignore. I have to tell you about them, hence there's the Utterly Unheard Of Part 3. Some of them just sound absolutely horrific, honestly. If you are worried about becoming a cast member and working the night shift before, these stories would put me off entirely. But you'll just have to wait to hear about them in the next part, as that is all from me today. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. Don't mind me, we're just gonna take a little brief interlude as someone is trying to hack into my website right now.